Welcome to the Best Music Podcast. My name is Dan the Music Man, and this week's featured guest is Taylor Goodson. Taylor Goodson is an active freelance percussionist and composer in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, participating in performance with members of the Metropolitan Opera, the New York Philharmonic, the New York City Opera, and the Orchestra of St. Luke's at many notable venues in both New York and New Jersey. He is the principal tympanist of both the Montclair Orchestra and the FEA Symphony, and he performs regularly with a multitude of ensembles, including the Paragon Ragtime Orchestra and the New Jersey Festival Orchestra. He is also active as a member of the New York Percussion Group, a New York City-based percussion ensemble, and Festival Percussion, an educational percussion quartet in the New York, New Jersey area. As an active composer, which means he's still doing it, people, Mr. Goodson has written material for a wide variety of mediums. His music for the concert stage ranges from solo instrumental pieces to large symphonic works. He was selected as a winner of the 2010 Dallas Wind Symphony Fanfare Competition. Taylor has also been published by Roloff Productions for some of his work for percussion. Since 2014, Taylor has been writing original shows for competitive marching bands in northern New Jersey. Two of his original scores have received national titles, Equilibrium in 2015 and Jamais Vu in 2019. He continues to compose new and engaging works for the marching arts each year. His work in the realm of digital composition in combination with live recordings, Inspirations Volume 1, 2014, and Inspirations Volume 2, 2015, are available through major digital music retailers, as well as some really cool projects he did for like Dungeons and Dragons, which I cannot wait to talk about because they are so cool. You can find him TG-Sounds, that's tg-sounds.com, and youtube.com/Taylor-Goodson, that's Taylor-Goodson. Taylor, how you doing?
I'm great, Dan. Thank you for that marvelous introduction. It makes my head way bigger than it needs to be.
Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. Excellent. So, Taylor, I've got a couple just warm-up questions for you, and then we'll get into it. So what is your primary instrument or musical discipline?
Well, that's always a tough question for me. I mean, I really try to weight my compositional, my composition work with my percussion work in many regards. Lately, I've been doing a lot more timpani work than I have the other fields of percussion, but I still very much like getting behind all the standard other orchestral percussion instruments.
For
So
sure.
I don't like to label myself as any one particular box. I definitely try to strike a balance between percussion, timpani, and composition.
For sure. And I can professionally say that I've seen you play both timpani and drum sets and percussion all extremely competently and reliably. And especially in the case of the timpani, it's like watching a ballet, watching you play those timpani. It's like we were singing this. For those of you who don't know, Taylor and I, we met at Montclair State University. And the first time I saw Taylor perform, we were singing a piece by Bob Aldridge, I think it was.
Parables, probably.
Parables by Bob Aldridge. Great composer out of the Jersey area. I think he won a Grammy, maybe not for that one, but the one after that. Anyway, and I remember watching you play the timpani for this. And by the way, it should be said that, yes, I should have been looking at my music. But when you see a musician playing with such precision and intensity, you can't help but watch. And watching you play those timpani, it's like watching a ballet or something. And like every note was perfectly tuned. And that's like the one thing that always gets my goat is if anything's off tune. And everything was just perfect. So from there, I knew I had to talk to you. So, how about a favorite song or piece of music at the moment that's been sort of knocking around in your head, or maybe just something you heard today or yesterday that you really liked?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Huge. Like, unbelievably large Star Wars fan. So I've been actually playing a lot of Granson's tracks from the recent episodes of The Mandalorian, because I think there's such a wonderful new palette. It's a great new sound that we're getting in the work he's been doing in this more modern style than we've been used to in the Star Wars era. So, trying to wrap my head around these new ideas and new textures. It's really great.
Did you watch the last episode of The Mandalorian?
Of course. Many times.
Did you hear the Luke's Jedi theme being played when the whole Darksaber fight was happening? Did you hear that moment? Like
There's so many great treats in that score.
Yes, I know, and I heard it, and I was like, "What is about to happen?" Because the only time they ever play that music in Star Wars is when a Jedi is going to show up. Anyway. Yeah. Spoiler alert. Sorry, I should have said it first, but there you go.
Spoiler tag on that description.
And for those of you who are listening to this podcast instead of watching it, Taylor is currently wearing, what's the rank in the Empire signified by the 3 red and 3 blue?
I could go off a hilariously nerdy tangent.
No, please.
The inconsistency of rank bars between the original films.
Yes.
So
okay.
This could be a Moff rank from episode 6.
Okay.
Or lieutenant or captain rank in other various parts of the franchise.
Got it. But like when we see Thrawn later on, he's got quite a few more bars than that to show him being sort of above the rank of Moff. Cool. So Taylor's currently wearing a sort of an homage to either an Empire status badge for showing what rank you are. I think they also had something like that going on towards the end of the Clone Wars, which is where it was taken from. But anyway, back to the music. What is your favorite book on music? It could be a method book. It could be a biography.
The book that hit me the hardest when I was reading through, shelves of material throughout my years. It's Aaron Copland's What to Listen For in Music. That was one of my favorites. It's very concise. It's not very long, but it's just a very clear cut. Here is a small overview of music from one of the most renowned composers of the time. And what hit me the hardest in that book was his unabashed realism. He had a chapter of, I can't exactly remember what the chapter was, but it breaks down to the composer. It was talking about inspiration, because that's a question we always get all the time. What inspires you? What metaphysical thing hits you in the brain all the time? And he was basically saying inspiration's kind of a joke. Like, a composer's job is to write music. There's no metaphysical being here that might, provide some sort of gleaming light that you're going to launch yourselves toward. Your job is to sit down, test, and make something happen. So it's an interesting concept. I'm not entirely sure I agree with it, but it was just a very interesting and very clear view that always struck me very hard.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Favorite film score or recent film score that you enjoyed besides The Mandalorian?
Well, it's not a film, so I guess I can't go that way.
Yeah,
anyway.
well, score for images, shall we say?
Okay. I have so many. Actually, I had the great opportunity to do a sit-down interview with Michael Giacchino. When was that? Probably October or November of last year. What an amazing time that was. I've always been a huge fan of Michael's work, from all his work with the Pixar films, Super 8, and then Rogue One a couple years ago as well. He's got such an amazing talent to be amorphous in all these amazing styles. And every track I hear from him, I'm shocked, I'm surprised, I cry, I'm in awe. His work for Doctor Strange versus his work for Up is like, I think you can't get more varied than that. And all of them hit home so hard. It's just a wonderful man. And it was great to talk to him and talk Chop a little bit. But if I had to name one that I've been recently returning to, it's very, very challenging. I don't know if I could do it. I really don't know. I listen to so much film music.
Oh, yeah.
That's my real bread and butter for what I turn to for comfort.
For sure. So let's talk a little bit about your timpani playing. So I mentioned in your intro you play with several groups as the principal tympanist. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with what timpani is, could you describe sort of the basic mechanics of how the instrument works?
Yeah, so timpani are usually in a set of 4 large drums They're known to many others as kettle drums. They usually sit in the back of the orchestra. You can't miss them. They're enormous. They are some of the foundation for what would become the percussion section in early orchestras in the classical style. Usually had two of them back there, and it was usually them by themselves. But from that heritage of the timpani grew the rest of the percussion ensemble when we started adding bass drums and cymbals and then snare drums and more modern flair and filigree. But the timpani are huge. They are pitched. They are modern timpani are controlled by a series of pedals. So as you mentioned earlier, when we were discussing parables, yes, they can be tuned, and they can be tuned very quickly, very accurately with your feet while you play with your hands. So it's a full body experience, just like many other instruments, to dive in there and control it with all of your appendages at once. And it's a wild and fun ride. I've always loved it.
For sure. So in addition to just being able to play the drums, you're actually able to, in real time, over the course of a piece of music, change the sound of the drums to follow whatever the piece of music or composers told you to do in your
Correct.
music.
Yeah, and it's, as a composer, I find these instruments just so fun to work with, because the amount of skill it takes to really do some of these modern parts, especially when we're talking about movie scores and things like that. Like they write these instruments very similarly to other bass instruments of the orchestra. There's many times you'll find yourself doubling the line in the tuba on these, which historically that's not what they were intended for. They were a drum first and foremost, but now in modern era times, they're more of a bass instrument. They fall into that realm now. So you're really skirting the line between percussion and those pitched families. It's very interesting. It's very fun to play, for sure. And knowing your role is something we can probably talk a lot about. But that's one of my favorite things, is knowing what your true function is as a tympanist, because it changes with every phrase.
Yeah, I think regardless of what your instrument is, like whenever I hear other musicians or composers or music directors have a genuine complaint about another musician, it's either number one, they played something wrong, or number two, they didn't follow the sort of guidelines around what their role was supposed to be. Like guitar players have a trope of playing over everything and playing too much and playing too loud.
They've never done that. I've never.
So yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your understanding of the role of timpani is. Maybe give examples of a couple different styles or pieces of music. So maybe in a symphony versus in a smaller percussion ensemble, how those roles change and shift, and then how your perception of the role changes and shifts along with it.
Yeah, of course. Now, of course, we could just talk about the pun of this all and the role of the technique of playing the instrument, which is actually, performing a role, which is a sustained sound. But I will save you the annoying puns of
the role of the timpani. Oh dear.
Exactly. It should be like a name of a book or something. Probably already is, I'm sure.
Hey, maybe it's going to be your memoirs. The role of the timpani.
My autobiography.
There you go.
The role of the timpani. Oh man. I'm picturing the cover now. This is terrible. We're not going down this road. No, but yeah, it's, as I said, in the early days when it was just two drums, they couldn't change their pitch. They were just set. So they would technically really be served alongside the trumpet. So we make the joke if we're playing Mozart or something of an earlier age. A lot of the times the timpani is trumpet 3, because there's trumpet 1 and trumpet 2 who can't, they don't have the chromaticism that a modern instrument has. So their parts are very, they're very boxed in. And the timpani is equally, well, more so boxed in. So the three of us usually operate as one unit. So, for example, I don't know how technical we should go here, but
go for it.
Tonic dominant here is where the timpani is usually going to land.
Correct.
So if we shift away from those primary key centers, I'm just going to sit there and wait for it to come back. I can't do anything to, I can't navigate navigate that terrain
For
in
sure.
early music. 'Cause
And when we're
it's just
talking about tonic and dominant, what we're speaking about is if we have a scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we're take the first do, then do, re, mi, fa, sol, do, sol, do. We're going to take number 1 and 5 of that scale, and those are going to be the notes you're going to play. And unless the song or the piece or the group is over a section that involves one of those notes, you're not playing.
right. Or you're getting a very interesting sound that is not really in the realm of that style of music.
Right.
Later on, as we started getting into Verdi and into some of the mid 1800s or so, that's where that kind of stuff gets a little more interesting. But in the classical style, and even in the Beethoven's time, he really kind of pushed the bar a little bit. But anything pre-Beethoven, it was pretty tame. So your role in the orchestra was rhythmic, more often than not. It was to embellish the trumpets and to embellish effects. As we moved into the Romantic era and things got a little more, mysterious, people were getting a little more creative with instrument, with a little more creative with what the instruments were. I mean,
And
they
a
got larger.
quick clarification there, Taylor. So the Romantic era is going to be a period of time where certain styles of music are taking place.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had the classical era, then we had the Romantic era coming in, and Beethoven, many will argue, is the bridge to that.
Yes. And typically when we think of classical music, it's not just music from the classical era. It's going to be music from the Baroque, classical, Romantic. All these different eras come together, and then globally the umbrella term for all these different eras is classical music. Just so the listeners at home understand.
It's an unfortunate label that we were gifted by the industry not long ago, but we'll deal with it.
Absolutely. Taylor, I'm sorry. Would you mind scooching to your left about 4 inches?
This way?
Yeah, there we go.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sorry, I got new wheels in my chair.
So fun.
So we get into later music with the Romantic era, where instead of 2 drums, now we're seeing regularly 3 drums, maybe 4 drums. Now they're different sizes. People are starting to experiment with sizes. They're experimenting with materials, metals, calfskin, anything. There's so many different variables now. It's not as set in stone as it was. So now we have composers starting to really come into their own. Oh, they don't have to just stick with the trumpets. They can color things. They can enhance some other brass sections that have now entered the orchestra. The French horns, they were operating as a larger unit with more robust techniques, and the tuba makes an appearance in later Beethoven and things like that. So, we're really starting to add in all these other elements, and the timpani starts to come into its own, especially in tandem with the other percussion instruments. So the thing that intrigues me the most is that word color. It's something I love to do. I mean, you look at the timpani, they're huge, they're big, they're bulbous, they're loud, but there's a lot of nuance you can get. I mean, I have a whole case of sticks that I bring with me, and each one can give me a different sort of color. I can play softly, I can get closer to the edge. I can get really nice highs that will make the violin shimmer a little more, or I can really dig in deep and get something that's going to enhance the tuba and the bass. It's great to play with these little textures. And
so
this
bag of sticks, these are different sticks with different sort of wrappings on them, different widths, different heavinesses of stick that then are going to make the timpani sound different just by virtue of the quality of the material that you're hitting it with.
Correct. And there's 2 sides to that. Yes, that is true. The implement will assist, but there's also so much nuance and technique that you can make the same stick do many different things. So combining those together, it's a very personal taste. I mean, you have to spend years crafting which techniques you want to work with. Like what sticks may work for me, would not work for many others, and vice versa. It's just a very personal thing. I in fact make my own, just because I think it's I have more control in how exactly which stick can work for me for a particular purpose.
That's fascinating. So how did you get into making your own sticks? What caused you to want to do that?
Well, I don't want to throw any vendors under the bus.
Sure. Yeah, we don't need to say names, but like what brought you to a point where you're like, all right, I need to make my own sticks?
When I was in college, I I had a fleet of sticks when I was, leaving high school because I knew you had to have more than just a pair, which is what I had at the time. Because of course that's you just had a timpani stick. That was it. And then when I started getting more serious in my studies, I'm like, oh, okay, so there are more options here. So I had a set of 5 or 6 by the time I was getting into college. And that's when I got there. I saw all the other percussionists. I mean, when I was in high school, I was, a lot of us who went to music school, I'm sure you can relate. You usually you're at the top of your game in high school. So when you get into college, you get knocked down a couple pegs, and you get to be amongst, your peers and other talent. So you get to see what other great musicians are doing. Not to say you don't have other great musicians earlier on, but I think you understand what I mean. It's just,
Sure.
It's a great equalizer.
Different talent pools. In high school, you're in a much smaller talent pool, whereas when you go to a music school or a conservatory, you're surrounded by people who've been pursuing this one musical goal for as long or longer than you have. And so the talent pool becomes incredibly concentrated just around that one subject and one focus area.
Precisely. Much more eloquently said than I. So I watched all these other percussionists, and they've got fleets of mallets, and they've got so many options. I'm like, wow, I really got to step it up here. I don't have anything like this. So then it just became a very long journey of experimentation. What are those sticks that she has? What are they bringing to the table versus what do I have? So, it's just a lot of conversation, experimentation. Hey, where'd you get those? What do they do? How does it work? Then I go out and try them out. No, those don't really work for me. They're a little too light in the back and all that. So I actually went through, I think I bought complete sets, and we're talking like 20 to 30 mallets of a couple different vendors just to see. And none of them, just for me, none of them were exactly what I was looking for. Some had some elements, some others had different elements. And I'm like, man, if I could take this head and put it on this handle, that'd be great. So that's what I did. I started ripping things apart and putting them together in different ways. And then I'm like, wait, why am I going to spend that kind of money? I'm going to buy 2 sticks just to break them and put them back together. Like, well, I'll cut out the middleman here. I'll just make them from scratch. So, I started calling up some vendors and talking to some carbon fiber suppliers out in California, and talking to some lathe workers locally and seeing what I can get cut, what I can do. And honestly, I didn't save that much money in all this experimentation. But the point being is I just wanted to have a product that I knew would work for me. I didn't have to tweak what I wanted to do because of the tool. I always tell my students, the tools work for you. So, make them your own. And it was something that really worked out for me in the long run.
Oh, that's fascinating. So can we circle back? I think we got up to Beethoven. What happens to the timpani after Beethoven?
Yeah, so we were talking about the Romantic era and how the timpani are used more, outside the box. Now I can color violins. I can color other instruments in the orchestra. So they really start. Tchaikovsky's great at this. He's one of my favorites to play. It's just he gives me such a much more interesting role in the orchestra. I hate using that word because of the puns, but so once we get there, and then we move into a little more exciting era for the timpani, then we start getting into some 20th century stuff, and that's where it really takes off. In the early 1900s, you start having pedal timpani be implemented. First, they started with hand cranks, and you always could adjust them with keys, but once they all put it on a chain and you crank it all at once, then we have a new world of pitch shifting and malleability.
Great. And to clarify there, so previously, to change the pitch of a timpani, a timpani, we call it a membranophone because it has a membrane that's stretched over a drum, essentially. And you can tighten and loosen the membrane if you tighten it, it will make the pitch higher. If you loosen it, it will make the pitch lower. So up until the 19th century, we could change and fine-tune the pitch of timpani just by using keys, by going around to the different places where the membrane is attached to the metal drum. Now, what you're saying is the invention here, what's changing the game is we get a hand crank. So instead of having to go around and adjust 20 little keys to try and get a minimal difference, we now can get a much larger difference by using a hand crank or a foot pedal.
Correct. So Yeah, the first thing to do was you take all the lugs that are around the on the rim, and they were all attached by a cog to a chain, and then you would use a crank that was attached via another cog to the same chain, which was great. However, you need both hands to play the instrument, so you can't tune while you're performing. Well, you can, but not while you're physically playing the instrument, unless you can do the passage one-handed, which you could, and many did. But the quick realization was, well, we've got feet that aren't doing anything, so let's shift the mechanics southward and see how that can work out. And there were so many different models and so many different techniques, and even today there's many different styles of timpani pedals and based on places around the world and different inventors. Um, so it's all up to personal taste and what they can do. We don't need to go into that because there's so many choices. But the concept was it turned from hand cranking to foot using, and that's where we are today.
Fantastic.
That really stuck.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about your timpani playing experience. You play with several orchestras, several groups. What was it like to get into those groups? What was the audition process like? Do you just get a call from someone and say, listen, kid, I heard you, you're great, you're in? Or do you have to actually go through is there a blind audition process? What does that look like, and what does the preparation for that look like?
Ooh. Well, as you said, it depends greatly between ensembles. The one group I'm principal timpanist of, the FEA Symphony, I was a founding member of. So I didn't actually have to audition with that. I was very good friends with the conductor starting the group, so I got in ground level, and I've been with him ever since. I think we started in 2008, I believe. We started that group, so I've been there for a very long time. So no audition process necessary for that, but you can argue that because I had to do a lot to get in the good graces of the founder in the first place. So in one way, as musicians, we're always auditioning at every point, all the time. Everyone is always listening. It's our job. So, yeah, you're judging. You're judging all the time. And just like you said, you're singing in the choir and I'm playing timpani in front of you, and you noticed me because I, quote, turned it on.
Yes.
Well,
absolutely.
You always have it on. You're always going to get that attention, which is always going to be a plus in my book, as long as I'm not doing something wrong, which does happen. We're all human.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the concept is that you're always auditioning in my eyes. But for the other group I'm in, the Montclair Orchestra, that was an audition process. It was not a blind audition, but it was an audition process. There was a panel of multiple judges, and I had to go through a whole bunch of repertoire to play for them. And then they contacted us back for some trials, and that was the rest of the history.
Oh.
I have auditioned for many other professional ensembles, but I have not been able to get to the final round. I've been a semifinalist. Thank you. Yet. Been a semifinalist. Those are always a great time. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of applicants, so I'm very lucky to have gotten the experiences I have already. I'm definitely not sad or angry about having not gotten to where I'd like to go, but it's all a long journey. Yes, exactly.
It's operative word. Operative word.
And in a lot of these cases, you can't take this stuff too personally. You're doing an audition. There's hundreds of other candidates, and they're looking for someone to take the role that fits a certain criteria that you may not know. You do your research. You know what the previous timpanist or the previous musician offered, and you do your best to replicate that, or you don't, because you don't know if the panel that's judging you wants what came before or wants something brand new. It's very, very difficult to say if you don't have someone on the inside helping you out, which you rarely do, because that's just not the nature of blind auditioning. So you can't be too dismayed. You just play your best. You do your study, you do your practice, you do mock auditions, you do all this preparation, and you just hope. You hope that you can give your best performance, and that is what they are looking for.
Fantastic. And I think it's important to clarify, too, that when you're going in to play repertoire, oftentimes everyone who is auditioning is playing the same repertoire.
Correct.
And when the auditioners, so the people who are doing the judging, they're looking for micro differences between the different performances. So let's say you have 100 people coming into audition. They're all going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. They're all going to play it at the same speed. They're all going to play it in the same key. They're all going to play it with the same instrument. So already we've reduced the variables down greatly. Plus, the way you're going to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" is written down, so you're now sort of bound to the constraints of the music. And then so how you put inflections, how you interpret different dynamics, different it's all in the minutia. The differences are going to be very, very small. And then also imagine being on that panel and listening to "Mary Had a Little Lamb" 100 times in a row, performed by extremely competent professional musicians. And then from that, you've got to pick out sort of your favorite. It's a grueling process. And could you maybe expand a little bit on your experience with blind auditions and what that looks like, so people have an understanding of that?
Sure. It's a very common process these days, especially for inclusivity and diversity purposes. It's great. It's a great equalizer. Um, so you basically, in the timpani world, the timpani are already on the stage usually, because you're typically using the instruments that are provided by the orchestra, as that's what you will be playing on. Some auditions will let you bring in your own, but it's getting they stopped. It seems they have stopped doing that more and more, which is a good thing, because you could roll in 14 different drums on there if you want to and have at it. So it's nice that everybody plays on the same thing. It kind of reins in the outliers for us. But on the stage, the timpani are usually just on whatever stage the orchestra's playing on, right in the center of the hall. And when you look out into the audience, which is usually about 2,000 seat theater or whatever it might be, there's just a big white sheet about halfway down the house, and behind that sheet is an unknown amount of panelists, anywhere between 3 people and 15, 20 people. Could be that big.
So
But
you cannot see the panelists cannot see you.
correct. And more often than not, well, I actually couldn't say that, but from what I understand, sometimes they're even turned around,
Hmm.
looking backwards out the hall. But it doesn't really matter, because you can't see beyond that sheet. And then there are people that work to be liaisons. There is someone who you can talk to and see and interact with, in case you need clarification. If you have to ask something back to the panel, sometimes in the audition process, they'll ask you to play something a different way. If you don't hear them, or you need them to repeat a direction, you have to talk to
The
your
liaison, so they only hear
yes.
the liaison's voice, so they can't hear the voice and then make a judgment call based on gender or
Correct.
culture, based on the style that you're speaking with, or mouth posture or anything like that.
Yeah, and they have very specific rules. Usually, when you enter the building, they have like a welcome packet sort of thing. It's like, you can do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can do this. They're all the same, so you get used to it after a while. But it is an intimidating process when you do your first one, because it's just you. You are there by yourself, but you're not by yourself. It's very intimidating.
For sure. So I think the last thing I want to talk to you about in terms of your timpani career is maintaining quality of work.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I've been very impressed with working with a lot of professional musicians with, especially drummers and percussionists, who come to mind, and that's yourself and Ryan McLaughlin, both out of Montclair State, is the consistency of the quality of the work over time. So, can you talk a little bit about how you approach, once you've reached your sort of target level of performance readiness? Let's say you're going to need to play, for example, maybe a music theater piece, or there's an orchestra piece you're going to have to play for maybe 7 nights in a row. How do you go about maintaining that level? Or do you just prepare to the point where you're going to have it for the next month? No extra preparedness needed.
There's always something to prepare, something that you can change. I mean, to this day, I have not had a perfect performance. I don't think the concept of a perfect performance is possible with
Mm.
as many factors, external factors, as we have as performers. But that's hunting for that, I don't think is the goal. I think the real goal is to gift the audience an artistic experience, which is why they're there in the first place. If they wanted sheer perfection, if the audience truly wanted simply to hear something that's perfect, they can just put their headphones on at home and listen to something that's been edited 100 times. And
Perhaps I should clarify, Taylor. I'm not speaking about looking for perfection. What
Mhm.
I'm talking about is maintaining a degree of performance readiness over time. So,
Right.
not that it's going to be perfect, but that you're going to be satisfied with the job you did on your way home from the show.
Right. So what I mean by bringing up the perfect performance, I hear a lot of stories of people that get disappointed when they don't have a perfect
Ah, I
performance.
see.
So, I just think that there's a difficulty when you use that term, or you're hunting for that term, for that perfection, because it's just unfortunately not something that I think is attainable. So, in order to get a worthwhile performance or a professional performance, I think you need to look beyond that term of perfection, because it's not going to happen. I know way too many top tier musicians who, they make mistakes. It happens. How you can recover from those and what you can learn from them and what you can change from them, that's what makes you a professional, in my opinion. How do you recover from the mistake? How do you learn from the mistake? Do you ever make that mistake a second time? That's the big one. If you're repeating mistakes, then I have to question your professional behavior. So if you're doing a long run, something that is, weeks or multiple shows at a time, yeah, you have the same prep. You have the same prep for the first, however long it takes you to prepare for it. You're going to prepare for the first show. But after that first show, you have the opportunity to analyze and to tweak and to really look, recording the performance, recording yourself, see, just remembering what happened, what didn't happen, what you'd like to see happen. It's a great opportunity. Unfortunately, in a lot of the freelance work I do, you don't have the luxury of multiple performances. You only get one shot. So those, I find, I tend to really, really hunker down and streamline my preparation even harder, because I don't have the luxury of a second chance. So it just really depends on the job, I suppose. But in terms of me and my preparation, I have to be very, very fortunate. I have to be very thankful for the time that I was allowed and the time that I took during my collegiate study, because in reality, when you're running around doing auditions, doing performance, doing teaching, doing writing, and trying to make a living, you don't have the time to devote hours and hours and hours of practice that you did. So I'm very, very, very lucky and happy that I could spend the 5 or 6 hours a day when I was in music school and really learn the craft, really learn what makes it tick. Like if I want that forte on a 29-inch drum on a C where it's mostly tightened up, I know. I have the muscle memory, I have the experience. There's no question in my mind. So I'm not practicing or honing any basic skills anymore. I have them. Sure, I'm going to maintain them through performance and through practice, but it's really that. It's really just that. It's maintaining what you've already learned. So at this point in my career, it's just I have the foundation. So now how do I add to that? And the real answer to that is just study, analysis, listening, scores, talking to other musicians, and practicing the art of performance. I practice the craft, I practice the basics. All of that is internal, it's here, but moving it on, how do I apply this with others? That's the part of my career that I'm in now, which that is great. It's a wonderful growth and you learn a lot, but it's a different kind of learning. It's a practical application versus a very basic and foundational learning.
Excellent. And so let's say you prep for that first show. The second night, how much time are you going to spend practicing in between the first and second show for the second show? Let's say there was like one transition between one thing to another thing that just it didn't feel quite right. Like you made it, but it was sort of by the skin of your teeth, and you're like, okay, we need to revisit this. How much time are you going to spend roughly?
It completely depends on the situation. Was it a situation where I didn't lock in with the bassist? Was it a
Mm,
situation where I flubbed it? In the latter, I'll go and shed it. I'll get it right. I'll just
And
do
when
what
we
I
say
can.
shed it, that means take it to the woodshed, which means practice.
Practice it, correct. So, I'll if it's something that's truly just me, then yes, I will absolutely take as much time as I can and get it as close as I can. If it wasn't right in the first place, there must have been a reason. So it either ran out of time for preparation or something else happened. But there's so many factors. Did I not lock up to the thing I was hunting for? Did I not go with the conductor? Did the vocalist do something different that I wasn't anticipating? So, your prep could be as much as write a little note in your music says watch the bassist, or listen to the vocal line, or any sort of thing. But it's a difficult question to ask just because there's so many different factors.
Well, thanks for doing your best with it.
Of course.
So let's talk a little bit about your compositions.
Hmm.
I especially want to talk about the compositions you made for marching band that they won national titles with, which is not a small thing. So can you talk about what it's like to write for marching band, how you got started writing for marching band, and talk a little bit about what you're doing now for marching
Sure.
band?
So we'll start with the how we got started
Yeah.
first. I spent my 4 years in high school in competitive New Jersey marching band, as many others have in the band world. Um, and it was great. I had a great time. I kind of learned, I cut my teeth with arranging and composition in high school because as a percussionist, there's some downtime. In my high school, I had, I think, 25 percussionists that were in the ensemble. So you don't get to play all the time because there's a lot of people that need something to do. So, I'll play a couple of the selections, and then I have half the rehearsal to just listen and engage. So I took that time to just investigate and analyze. Like, what are the trumpets doing? What do they do? I have no idea what they do. I play the drums. I don't know. So I would kind of mosey over there and be like, oh, okay. So the trumpets work as a unit. They do these three parts and they play together. All right, great. I get it. Now let me move down the line. What do the trombones do? And it was just this exercise of discovery. And I always had a piano in my house, and I always would tinker around and learn things by ear and figure that out. So it was great to really have this personal on hand experience with orchestration, with what the different instrument families did and how they held their own roles. So then I just started experimenting with my own compositions at the time, which was just messing around and trying different sounds. I think I was using an early version of Finale to play around. But from there, that's where my composition career really started. It was just
And I think it's really important to mention for any students of music who are listening to this to look at the steps you took, because your first step was to engage in a lot of critical listening and to understand intellectually what was going on. That was the first step, and that's where you did a lot of the learning. So a whole lot of learning happened just from listening.
most definitely.
Right.
But
And then once you spent a whole lot of time listening, working on your critical listening. So critical listening, we could describe it as honing the ability to isolate within a sound when you hear multiple instruments at the same time, just being able to pick out one instrument or one note or one passage. So you were honing that in high school, and then from that base, then you start to create your own music because you've internalized the roles of the different instruments, and now you know how to use them.
yeah, or more accurately, I knew how these specific composers were choosing to use them.
Indeed.
So when you listen to works by this guy or that lady, you'd understand they use them in different ways, and then you'd kind of try and experiment, find how you want to use them.
Mm.
So it was a very interesting process. It was something I was very fortunate to have that experience, because I could have just been playing all the time and I would have missed this entirely. So by not being as engaged as possible, I actually was more engaged, if that makes sense. It's kind
Yeah.
of a weird nebulous realization. But from there, it was just okay. Now let's put it to practice. I started copying things. I would write down what I hear and see if I could figure it out. Because I didn't take the music of these instrumentalists. I would just listen and say, oh, let me see if I can go in the the back room here and parse it out on piano. And be like, oh, this is what the clarinets are actually doing now that I can hear it. So it was just a lot of replication before creation, and being able to really understand what was happening was key to what would eventually become my own success. So then I started really diving in, doing some early compositions and having people play them. I'd go to my friends and be like, hey, can you play this on the tuba? What does it sound like? And they'd be like, I can't play that. I have no idea what those notes are. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I didn't write it. Well, so let me see what you can do. And then it was just a lot of back and forth and experimentation, because I didn't have a composition teacher at that time. I didn't study composition. I was really studying to be a percussionist. So this was more of we just experiment and have some fun and see what eventually happens.
Well, you did have teachers. Your teachers were the composers of the pieces that you
Correct.
were listening to and transcribing. And transcribing would be the act of hearing a musical sound or musical passage or musical piece, and then going and replicating that either on paper, so either writing down the actual notation, or translating that as you were onto a piano.
Correct. I mean to say that I didn't have a formal composition
Indeed.
teacher,
Yeah.
giving me assignments and all that sort, which of course they would have given me probably very similar assignments of
Absolutely.
transcribing and learning and all that.
Yeah, 100%.
Happened to do it on my own, which was very lucky.
Yeah,
accident.
very like you found the right way of doing it all on your own. That's fantastic.
Yeah. But, as then I stepped into college and I started showing the compositions to more and more people and really getting some good feedback. Eventually, when I started studying orchestration officially as a college course or any of that, I did some private orchestration studies with one of my professors there. And then I was working with some composers directly about different techniques. That's when I really dove into my compositional education. It still wasn't a formality. I didn't do a degree in composition, but I was getting those official composition experiences based on the experiences I set before myself, really. So from there, for the marching band thing, I did a lot of time teaching. I spent, when I started, I think I needed 60 credits to become certified enough to teach for marching band. So I eventually went back. I taught for my home school, or my high school, for a little while, but then there was a change of leadership and I went, teach somewhere else, and kind of bounced around throughout my college time to different experiences. And then, I was always doing the drum line, always doing the percussion, helping out the pit in the front of the ensemble and all that. But eventually someone's like, oh, I know you do arrangements. Like we want to do this tune. Can you arrange it? Like, yeah, I can arrange it. It's not hard. It's easy to do. It's just a little pop tune you wanted a couple measures of. Sure, here you go. And then from there, it was like, oh, this guy can arrange. Here you go. Here you go. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do this. And then eventually, I actually got called back to my high school, and I was like, oh, I know you've been having some success as a composer. We'd love to try an original work. I'm like, oh, sure. Let's go for it. I was doing a lot of television style, film style music of that, more textural and exciting kind of thing, and it works really well for a marching band program. So I did that. I don't think it took like 5 or 6 months to get the product ready to perform. And actually, that first piece was the first national title it brought in. So I'm like,
hey,
okay,
all right.
I guess this is a thing. So from there on, it was like, yeah, how can we improve? How can we make this better? How can we tailor this for different things? And it's been a fun adventure, but it's interesting. I mean, the how is very interesting because it's so personalized. Every high school, every ensemble is capable of their own strengths. So even from year to year in the same school, it's like, oh, well, this year we've got a really good trombone section. It's like, oh, okay, well then let's change the angle here. We're going to write in a style that really emphasizes the middle voice, or worse. It's like, not worse. I shouldn't say worse, or different. Like, yep, we got 4 tubas this year, but we only got 3 flutes. I'm like, all right, well, hey, let's find a way to emphasize your strengths. So that's where the national title thing comes from. It's like you really got to know the ensemble and what they are capable of.
So how does a national title get won?
Well, they're competitive marching bands, so they have anywhere between a handful to 10 or 15. I guess not 15, that's too many, but usually around 10 is the max of competitions through September through November. And eventually you have rankings you hit the state championship, and then from there you go to the national championship. And it's just you just hopefully you can get all the way down to that good seed at the end, and boop, hopefully you can pull out a win. And it's tough. There's some real competition out there. I mean, New Jersey, there's plenty of talented schools out there, so it's fun. But my engagement as a composer, I try to get there as much as I can, because what you thought would work, and you go to the first rehearsal and it's usually a disaster, because you're trying to read this high level music right off the bat, and it never works out. So you don't really exactly know where it's going to end up, because they're going to be rehearsing this multiple days a week for months. So they can really hone it to be what you want. So I might step in a couple weeks away from the end of the season, and I'd be like, oh, I think that section they got that. It's nailed. It's great. Let's freshen it up. Let's make it harder. Make it challenging. Let's make it more engaging. Let's really emphasize the emotion in this section to really play with the color guard that might be using this color palette. You really just got to tie the package together and tighten it up. So I do lots and lots of edits and
iterations too. It's an iterative process. So you're actually going back over time with the high school ensemble, seeing sort of what they're able to handle, because at that point in time they've maybe been playing their instrument for 3 years, maybe 5 years, but it's not been a terribly long time.
Right.
And so you're kind of going through each year, each ensemble, each composition, going back, changing, fine-tuning, making something harder, making something easier. It's a really fascinating process.
Yeah, and it's very rewarding for me, because I get to interact with all these people and the directors and the students themselves. And it's one of the most rewarding things is when I see the students, I see their eyes just widen when they get the music for the first time. Like, how does that work? I'm like, trust me, it will work, but you gotta take the time. You gotta take that instrument out of home and really, really practice it. And when they finally have the first show, like 7 weeks into the season, and they nail it, you're like, that's it. Like, now you get it. And they you see it, the light bulb goes off. Like, holy crap, that was so cool. Like, exactly. So I love watching the process. You don't really get that spark with professionals so much, because they can do it. They don't have that kind of light bulb moment of, wow, that was great, because they've experienced it hundreds of times over. So I love that. It's such a fun process to see them really get involved.
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost like you're actually contributing on a teaching level too, because you have to, it's almost like developing a curriculum, because you have to figure out how hard you can make it. You figure out how quickly to introduce new concepts. Very, very fascinating.
Yeah, very often I have, because it's a high school ensemble, you have freshmen and seniors in the same group. So very often I'll have like the A and B flute parts. And they're playing the same part, but that septuplet run might only be 2 notes for the B part. So,
Right.
It is an educational process. And that's even better, because the freshmen can see, oh, wow, I can do the A part in a couple of years. Wow, this is going to be great. So it's very fun. It's a very fun process. And yeah, it's very rewarding.
Oh, that's super cool. Well, another area you compose music in is, you just talking about film scores being your bread and butter, man, when it comes time to put pen to paper, you can hear it in your compositions, man. You can hear just like the way you're able to translate a fantasy realm into music and translate different situations into music. You're spot on. I was listening to the intro of the what and I'm sorry, I forget, what was the name of the Dungeons and Dragons piece you did?
Oh, that's a large suite called The Tales of Volterra.
Yes, The Tales of Volterra. I was just listening as a start to the credits, and I was saying to myself, this is like Elder Scrolls like music, like you'd hear in the credits for a bit. And the fact that the connection is so instant that you're really capturing that fantasy feeling, that fantasy sound so effectively, I think is so cool. So you actually created this suite, Tales of Volterra. This was for was it a pre-recorded or live-action Dungeons and Dragons game that was played?
No, it's actually for my own Dungeons and Dragons game that I lead. So I created the world of Volterra with some friends of mine, and that's we play weekly with our Dungeons and Dragons group. And as they discover more places, and as they go to these different different worlds and realms. I'm like, well, what would be a great way for me personally to describe this stuff? Well, I'm a composer, so the best way for me to describe it is through my art. So I just made these tracks for them. Some of them are based on some older projects that never got off the ground, so it was really nice to get back to those and really investigate this new world. It's just great. I mean, because of current times where things are a little lesser these days, I had the time to return to those kinds of personal projects. So, through the ashes comes opportunity. So it was always fun to go back to these old products and give them new life.
Indeed. And for anyone listening to this podcast, we're referring to the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 through 2021, which means a lot of musicians are not going out to play as much and they're staying at home a little bit more. So do you actually play the pieces of music when you're in the different geographical areas, like when you guys are sitting around playing?
Yep, for sure. I have,
Awesome.
because we're all remote right now, I use Zoom for video, but I also use Discord for audio, just as kind of a safety net, just in case one system goes down. But there's a way in Discord where you can have another user who's a bot who can play different tracks and have them loop and do all sorts of things. So yeah, I use them as a actual part of the game.
That's fascinating. Has anyone ever contacted you? Because I know there are some sort of podcasts and streamed Dungeons and Dragons group. Has anyone ever contacted you to make music for their group?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the projects that are on my YouTube page, a lot of the character portraits and some of the things that aren't labeled as that group, those are commissions from other creatives. So those are pieces that portray their character or their group or their organization. And
That's
I
fascinating.
love that process. I
Oh,
so
cool.
much. Yeah, because it's they'll come to you. I've got this group of dwarves that needs a theme. I'm like, okay, cool. So what does that mean? Tell me about them. Tell me their story. What do they do? Are they underground? Do they live in the air? Are they sea dwarves? I don't know what they are. So there's so many different factors. I just love it. I love talking to these other creative folks.
Is that like your piece that was Thane's theme, I think it was?
That's right.
Yeah.
What is it called? Yeah, For Thane and Mountain, I think it's called.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was a guy, the fellow who's like, yeah, I've got this guild I run. It's a bunch of dwarves, and we do cool stuff. I'm like, awesome, like, let's do it.
Wow.
Yeah, I love talking about it. I mean, I usually we usually back and forth. It's just me at the piano sketching some things out, and it's always fun. It's like, because there's always that one moment they have where you send them a little piece, and they're like, oh, that's nice, but I don't know if that's really what we're looking for. Okay, well, here's something else. And after the third or fourth time, they go, "That's it. That's what I was looking for." And then the floodgates are opened, and it's such a fun process. I really love it.
Oh, that's amazing. So, any D&D players who are looking for some theme music for their streams or games should get in contact with you on your website?
Please, yes, absolutely.
And that is tg-sounds.com. That's T like tango, G like golf, dash sounds, sounds.com. Talk to Taylor. He will hook you up with some sweet backtracks for your Dungeons and Dragons game.
Oh yeah.
I actually do have a gig for you on that. I've got a student who wanted some Dungeons and Dragons stuff. I'll give it to you after the podcast when we're done.
Perfect.
Yes.
Love it.
Amazing. So, with all this playing and all this composing, it's super important to understand that there's a lot of practice that goes on outside of the actual instruments and outside of the actual composition in terms of introspective understanding of self and understanding what makes you tick and what helps you get the best result, both in composition and in performance. So this is now the second part of this podcast where I'm going to ask you some questions around creativity and around lifestyle, and how all this sort of plays in to impact your ability to perform on these different levels. So about how many hours do you sleep a night? And do you find that sleep impacts the various areas of your music and creativity?
That's a great question and super important question. I tend to usually get an average of 7 hours a night. I'm not hitting the 8-hour mark, but I find that I can operate just fine with 7. I do find myself, if I don't hit that 7 mark, the day takes a little longer to get going. For me, interestingly enough, I don't know where this came from or why it came about. I'm incapable of taking a daytime nap. I have never taken a nap. I don't know why. If the sun is up, if it's during the day, it's not time for sleep. I do not sleep until the day is over. It's just a weird thing I've always had. I don't know. No matter what happens during the night or anything, it doesn't matter. Like the day is the day. I don't know. It's weird. But yeah, 7 hours. Like you got to get your sleep. It's super important, especially if you're performing at a high level. If you're performing at all, like you need to have those batteries charged. I'm not afraid to tell people that I hate sleep. Like I hate it. I hate the concept that I have to just stop for 7 hours and recharge. I just, as comfortable and nice as it is, I just hate the concept that time has to stop every day. But like, if in order for me to do anything, any day, you got to be ready to go. So waking up refreshed is super important.
And how do you find that lack of sleep impacts your creativity when it comes to composition?
It's just a matter of the focus being in the wrong place.
Mm,
If my mind says, "Hey, you're tired," and like you need to go eat something or wake yourself up, that's 10 less minutes I could doing something else,
mm.
doing something that's really recharging those creative juices.
Have you ever tried any special diets to influence creativity or performance, like keto, paleo, anything like that?
I do a meatless diet right now,
Hmm.
but it's not for creativity.
Got it.
It's for health purposes.
Understood. How about mindfulness or meditation? Have you ever tried any of that?
I have tried meditation a couple times. I've really wanted to try yoga, which I have never gotten into, but I've heard far too many musicians talking about how great it is for the mind and body. So it's something I definitely want to try, and I have really no excuse not to try it right now. But so hopefully I'll get into that. My girlfriend loves it. She's more than happy to help me get into it. So it's certainly something I'd be willing to try. Um, I didn't do, I'm not a professional in any of those regards. So I didn't really know how to meditate, but the fact of just sitting there thinking and being in your own thoughts and taking time for that, it's important. Um, but I kind of use my experiences in listening and study as a meditative experience.
Mm,
So
mm.
it's less of me just sitting there and going through my own experience, but I take the time to really have an out of body experience through study, if that makes sense.
So listening to music is your meditation.
Yeah, yeah. If I have the time to actively sit down and listen to something, which
Mm.
is unfortunately a rarity these days, but more often than not, I'm listening while doing something else. I'll do an active listen of something, but while I'm on a walk or while I'm cooking dinner or something else. It's rare that I get a moment to just sit down and I'm exclusively listen. But when you do, you can get real lost real fast, and it's great.
Yeah, for sure. Um, how about exercise? Have you ever tried using exercise to either increase your energy for performing later on in the day, increase focus? Uh, have you tried anything like that?
Not for particular use to translate into a performance.
Mm,
I mean, let's be real. I'm a percussionist. Like the exercise is getting into the hall. So no, but I walk every day. I have a regimen for personal health that I
mm.
use, and just like the sleep, if the personal health's not in line, if you're sick or you're not doing what you need to do, you can't create at the top level. So taking time to make sure your body gets what it needs. That's super important. So while my exercise isn't specifically targeted performance, it's totally targeted performance in a non-direct way.
Indeed. Yeah, for sure. What is your support system like, and how does that affect your ability to make music and be creative?
Support in emotional aspect.
Yeah, so girlfriend, family, friends, what does that look like, and how do people in your life help you be in a place where you have 2 hours to sit down and try and compose something where no one's
Yeah,
going to
it's
interrupt you?
I am a fiendish scheduler.
Mm,
So if something's on my book, it's happening. There's no way around it. I That's the way I handle it all. Especially I will schedule a dinner. I will schedule personal time. I
Mm,
will, I am very, 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 very firm in what is in that book. And yeah, the thing is, you have to spend. You can't get completely enveloped in your career path, even if it
mm,
is this artistic endeavor. I left graduate school and I realized I didn't spend a lot of time creating relationships with people. I didn't spend a lot of time, you know, bettering myself. I
mm.
didn't spend a lot of time doing anything but those 5 or 6 hours a day of practice and studying this craft. So I was like, I was streamlined to a path of burnout real fast because it's grueling and I needed something else to do. So, I turned to some great hobbies. I've met a lot of people. I spent time, I specifically made time for non musical purposes, which that has really been the most refreshing thing in the last handful of years is to really find something else, something out of this realm that you can cling to. And that's been great for me, keeping it fresh.
For sure. So it seems like the secret for you around everything is to put it on the schedule, and that way you can properly manage the balance between work and life.
For sure. And that balance changes all the time. Just like you say, when you've got a run of 7 shows, I'm gonna have to spend a month really investing in the preparation. But then once the shows start and I can dial back the needed prep every day, then I can put back the personal things. Just finding that balance. And it's very difficult to do, but I'm very lucky that I was able to find what I needed balance wise.
Absolutely. What part or parts of music come the easiest to you, and follow up, were you born that way?
Interesting, interesting. Musicality has always come to me very easily. I mean, it's a huge blanket term for just music in general, but I've always found that when I'm in an ensemble, there's very little question of where things go, timing wise. Like it's when you understand how an ensemble performs and breathes together, you don't need anyone to tell you where it goes. There's only one place. Like when the big climax happens in the middle of the last movement of the symphony, there's just this natural ebb to that's where it goes. And some people need the guidance. Some people can't as easily find that. But I find that with my experience behind the brass section, who operates through breath, plus me sitting behind the timpani, like it's just so easy to find these places. Now that also relies entirely on who you're performing with. If I perform with them a number of times, then I can really find those. I can find my comfort very easily. But I also find that I have a decent ability to read other musicians. It comes with the territory of all the things I've explained, the realizing of the role, the colors that I'm searching for, all that. It all comes into one package. So I find that my participation in the ensemble feels very natural.
And is that something that when you were a kid and you were listening to music sort of made sense to you? Or is that something that really came out to you when you were doing your critical listening in high school and understanding the roles that the composers were giving to the different instruments?
I don't think that either of those are a unique experience. I think it
Mm,
all leads to the same endpoint. And
mm.
every experience I've had through my study and through performance has led to this summit of comfort.
Yeah, it seems to me like also you may just have a real clear sense of self and a real clear sense of situation and a very, very efficient way of, an effective way of understanding the context of yourself within other situations.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice that I can give to any other musician, especially my students, is just stay humble. Like
Mm.
the art is greater than all of us. And
Mhm.
we are, I don't want to say that we owe the art anything, but we are it is our job to embody the art. It is not the art's job to embody us. So I think just staying humble to the fact that you have the opportunity to be a part of something so great and something so vast, I think is very important.
Now, that's a very interesting perspective to have for a number of reasons. I think it's very interesting from a classical music standpoint because that is kind of the mindset, right? That these pieces have been played by thousands of people over hundreds of years.
Hmm.
So it's not you're sort of serving the composer's vision over and over again. And I think as a composer, for you, you're having other people serve your vision. But I think where it gets very interesting for me too is there's almost this, I don't know, I've never heard like a jazz musician, for example, put it in that context. And maybe I've just not talked to the right one yet.
Yeah.
But perhaps that philosophy works so well for you because of the types of music that you're playing. And I think arguably we can apply that to all music.
I think so.
Yeah,
But
just putting that out there. I think that arguably we can put that on all music, all styles, all genres, all disciplines. However, I think that, and again, I could be wrong here, and maybe I'm projecting my internal ego onto this, but like for me as a soloist, there's it feels a little bit more like I'm driving the car as opposed to paying a toll on a highway. Does that make sense?
it does. And I think that all comes down to knowing the role. There are
Mm,
times within a symphony, like if I'm playing Mahler's Fifth Symphony, there's a great moment where the timpani gets the melody in this soft little passage. And that's when I know this is my show now and I can come out of my shell a little bit.
mm,
But it's the ability to be able to have that moment, but then step back and realize that everyone
mm.
else also has their moment. So yes, sure, this is my moment to shine. I get that. But is it my moment or is it the music's moment? I guess that's my point.
That gets very complicated, right? Because, like, let's say your name's on the marquee, as it
Right.
were, right? Like, is that your moment or is it the music's moment? And I think that's a very interesting conversation to have, and I don't know that there's a right answer.
I don't
Uh,
yeah, no, I don't think so either.
but it's just a fascinating thing to think about, right?
Yeah.
Super
It's
cool.
it's one of the things about this art form that I just love so much. It's a collective experience. And I guess when I really say be humble, it's just know that you're part of a bigger experience.
Mm,
Even if you're a solo in that room and you've got, I don't know, 30,000 people listening, streaming, enjoying your art. It's an experience for you and them. It's not
mm.
you're not showing off to, I mean, maybe you are. Maybe that's what they want. But even if you are showing it off,
Uh,
it's experience for them just as much as an experience for you.
wow, fascinating. What part of music have you had to work at the most, or that's been the most difficult for you to execute?
Hmm, difficult. I mean, I can go very technical and tell you what my weakness is as a percussionist, but I'm not going to gift that to you or anybody. But there's some, going through college, you learn you have to do everything, especially a
Hmm.
percussionist. Like you got to hit all of these instruments and you got to hit all this repertoire, and you really got to make sure you can do all of it.
Can you talk
So,
about that a little bit? Just
sure.
within a college education, how many instruments are you expected to learn to play within the percussion umbrella?
Yeah, see, this is where it gets challenging because the real meat of it is snare drum, marimba or mallet playing, and timpani. Those are the three main areas. But go ahead and look at a percussion section. We've got bass drum, you got cymbals, tambourine, triangle, castanets. You've got a
Cactuses,
huge
cacti.
cacti with microphones on them. Sure, we definitely have that for John Cage. But yeah, it's this wildly large ecosystem of percussion, and the curriculum, the education structure really focuses on those three main ingredients. But if you were to only focus on those, you are relatively, I don't want to say useless, but you're lacking a huge important part of this.
And this is
So
important in terms of an education, in terms of self-edification, or in terms of your ability to get jobs when leaving music school.
all of them, it applies to all of those for sure. But it's very hard to, it's music school. It's very hard to quantify a lot of this. Grading and all those sorts of things and growth. We talk about SGOs and student growth objectives in public school. I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with that sort of thing, but you're trying to quantify progress with the arts. It's very, very challenging to do.
Especially with art, because art is subjective. So how do you quantify progress in art? The only tangible way to do that is via technique.
Correct.
Is by the only part of a musician's performance that can be globally judged. So all musicians will be able to agree on one thing normally, and that's going to be the technique of a performance, how it makes you feel, how the performer does it, how it's executed globally. All these things are going to be subjective. What it makes you think of. All these things are subjective. The one thing that is arguably objective and that we do create hierarchies and structures around is technique.
Correct. But that, it's very easy for that to break apart very fast because the technique that I may use, that I have come to learn and to embrace, might not work for another musician. They just may have a different approach, and they might get the same result. So then you run into a new difficulty of, well, how can we quantify those differences? But we're not going to get into it.
Point is, it's really hard to judge. Very, very hard to judge progress within a given art field. Very difficult, and very difficult to assign a grade to it, and very difficult to say, well, you were here 8 weeks ago, now you're here, so that difference equals X. It's very difficult to do that.
So taking that a step further, if you're doing a final exam as a percussionist, you have to hit those three main areas: snare drum, timpani, and mallet playing. And you can. You can study all semester and be able to perform that flawlessly. However, you also need to, at some point, learn how lifting a triangle and hitting it at a perfect angle on different sizes for different textures with different beaters. You need to learn all these things. And that's nowhere in the curriculum. There's no, semester 3, you learn the triangle. That's not how this works. You have your first day in concert band and you need to play cymbals. And, you just got to spend time figuring out when and how you can incorporate those learnings in your own study. Because you're not going to have a private lesson. Well, I mean, you could, theoretically, but based on the structure, you're rarely going to have private lessons or enough time to devote to sitting down and learning how to play those kinds of things, those ancillary, auxiliary instruments. So the balance, it all comes back to the schedule. It all comes back to the ability to balance your time. When I was in college, I was the crazy one who spent all those hours practicing. But that's because I said tonight I'm going to take out all the cymbals, I'm going to go on the stage, and I'm going to see how they work. I'm going to test them all out and really play with those. Versus, okay, I spent my 2 hours on snare drum today, I'm good. Like, you really gotta have a more holistic view of your necessities in learning.
And a nuanced approach. And an approach to be, it's a scientific approach. It's like when you watch like 3-star Michelin chefs trying to cook a pasta dish. Like they cook, a couple thousand versions of a pasta dish or a bread just to get the right one. So you are the guy who is willing to put in the extra hours to see every combination of cymbals hit in all the different ways you could think of. How to get the sound you were looking for, what the different permutations and combinations would result in.
Right, and that comes down to what my experiences are today. When I have a job to play with an orchestra, I can look at the music and be like, I need these cymbals, and I know how to hit them together. There's no question that I can do that. I don't have to practice for that role to prepare from a base level. I just can do a little bit of prep where I listen and I can make some markings, and then the first rehearsal I can do it. So yeah, it's creating your own foundation that's very difficult.
At what time of day or times of day do you prefer to practice?
I am a night owl through and through. I prefer to do all of my work after dinner if I can.
Wow.
Now there's a caveat to that because I don't have a lot of luxury time to practice. It's a lot of it, I do a lot of practice through performance, through rehearsals and through repetitions with the group. There's not a lot of downtime to spend practicing. So when I do finally get the downtime, it happens to be at after the end of the day, if there's no performance that evening. So yeah, I've always stuck to the night out schedule, and that's a product of what I had to do in college. Really, you get up in the morning, you do your music theory, you'd have lunch, you do a little more study, then you'd have your ensembles in the evening. Then once all that was taken care of, then I could have my time to
Mm.
do my study, and that's just something that's never gone away. It's always been. I guess it's just because of the practice of it. That schedule has always been that way. I do not work well in the morning. I just never have.
How many hours a day when you do have time to practice, generally? Like, what's your target number of hours to practice? And again, I understand it's going to vary on your schedule, but like, let's say you had nothing to do that day, your schedule was open. How many hours would you practice for before you go, okay, right there, that's enough?
It's so varied. I guess it depends on what the goal I have set is.
Okay, technique. You're practicing different techniques. So it's going to be highly cerebral, super, super hyper focused practice. How many hours of that are you going to get through before you should have to say, okay, my brain at this point is saturated. I can focus no more. I need to go do something else.
I mean, I could easily get lost in a multiple hour session, but that's a rarity.
So multiple hours, we're talking 5, 10,
No,
4,
I would
3,
like 3 or 4.
3 or
But
4. Okay.
I think really just an hour is enough to really keep it where it needs to go.
Hmm.
I mean, unless I'm really trying to prep for a solo performance or something that really needs a lot of attention, I don't need to spend a lot of time making sure that those finer techniques still exist. Makes sense.
And so your feeling is that an hour of practice, is that the most effective time span for you to practice in generally?
Yeah, yeah. It's very difficult to say because the need is so different.
Well, but
But
based on
yeah,
your
if
own
I had an
personal
hour,
attention
if I could
span.
devote an hour, I can most likely get what I need to get done
Fantastic.
more often than not. But I say this with a huge caveat. It's only because that foundation has been
Yes.
so resolutely set.
So speaking of resolutely setting that foundation, on average, what's your best guess for the number of hours you were practicing, not in class, not in ensembles, that you were practicing at your peak of practice hours per day?
Yeah, there were days where I would push the 8 hour mark. Now, these numbers might scare you, but it's not like I just locked the door and I was in there for 8 hours straight. You might do an hour in the morning, you might squeeze in an hour in the afternoon, and then have 5 or 6 hours at the nighttime. So that was probably like I don't think I could even go for more than that. But on an average, I would say I was putting in between 4 and 6 hours a day total at my peak. Now I couldn't like you have to take time to step away
Yes.
because you're going to get in your own head real fast.
Mm.
If I'm trying to do the same thing for 4 hours straight and it's not happening, you just
Oh, no, 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 no,
gotta
no,
take
no.
time to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
reinvestigate. And yeah, there's so
Mm.
while I say that 4 and 6 hours a day was where I was landing, there are some days where I would step away and I would just focus on some study or do something else. It's not like it was a 7 day a week endless endeavor. But yes, it was a significant amount of time. And it was a product of multiple things. I was told stories from professional musicians that like this is the target you should be doing. Like you need to practice 8 hours a day. I'm like, okay, sure. So I should do that because that's what everybody else is doing. But it was a realization of what I was talking about educationally. Like I need to add in all these other things. I need to focus on these other areas that I don't have time to during my regular experiences. So, I got to make sure all these targets are hit.
So I think it's important for us to clarify and just really make it super duper clear that when you hit a block or an area or you're getting stumped on something, let's say you're trying to execute a particular technique or a particular transition between something to the next thing, and it's not working for you after 3 or 4 tries, you tried slowing it down, you tried decreasing the tempo on it, and it's not making sense. You're not going to sit there and keep on trying to do it for 6 hours. You're going to put it down, go walk outside, get a snack, drink some water, change gears, come back, maybe try something else, and then later that day or the next day, go back and try that thing that was blocking you.
For sure. And one of the things that I was really that I liked to do, I'm not going to argue that it's good practice, but I loved to take a step away from that difficulty and go back to something that, was comfortable. I remind myself, okay, you have things you can do. This one's causing trouble, but don't let that mask your overall experience. Go back to the other instrument, play through that thing that you liked to play, that you were having a good time with. Still needs work, but it's comfy. Play through that, and then, clean your mind a little bit, refresh your palate, and then, you'll have a refreshed view of like, okay, I couldn't do this thing that's comfy at some point, and I can't do this thing now. So, let's push, let's do it. But yeah, you have to be able to step away. None of this stuff happens overnight.
Speaking of the night, in addition to enjoying practicing at night, do you also find that you're your most effective creatively at night as well?
100%. Absolutely. There are days where, I might need to be composing through the day. I might have a deadline coming up and I need to squeeze more in. But yeah, no, I tend to do my best work at night, for sure.
Have you ever burned out and not felt creative?
Oh yeah, all the time. It happens all the time. You're sitting here at the piano, you're trying to find that compositional idea, that next chord, and you just, I play the first chord, I'm here where I want in the structure, and I'm fishing all over the place. I'm like, none of this is right. None of this is happening.
But is that from burnout or just because that day or at that moment the download wasn't happening?
It's very, very difficult to say. I have a hard time. I guess I have a hard time separating them.
Huh.
It might be because I'm writing too much. It might be because I'm trying too hard, and that I would probably define as a little burnout. Or it may just be that my mind's not on it right now. But true burnout, where I have like hit a wall and said, I don't know, like I don't know if this is for me. No, I was very fortunate to not have that happen, simply because of my realization that I needed to add in some non-music time.
Indeed. So you've effectively avoided complete burnout by being so structured and so careful with your daily schedule and making sure you have time for other things that aren't music. And going back to what you said earlier, making sure that you're approaching life in a way that the career and the music and the art doesn't become this all-consuming sort of backpack that's with you all the time, that sometimes you can take the backpack off and just be a human being and not a musician and not an artist.
Well, what helped me the most was these hobbies, getting out of the music world and meeting other professionals in other industries where, they work 8 hours a day, and at after 1 minute after the 8th hour, work's done. No more work. We're done.
No, what a weird concept.
Yeah. But it struck me very, very hard. So I'm like, why don't we do that as musicians? It's art. Yeah, it's powerful. Yes, it's meaningful. But, we need to live. We need to have these regular experiences just like everybody else. So being able to, I don't want to say turn it off, because we can't turn it off. We're musicians. That's just not how it works.
But you can put it down for a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Step away.
Yeah.
I had this weird problem for a long time where you turn on the radio and I find myself, throwing music theory back at it.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that chord. It's so fancy.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm missing the point.
Yep.
Like, by doing that. So taking a step away, enjoying hobbies, approaching life in a more, I hate to use the term, but normal instance where, you have a chunk of devoted time for work versus, not work. I think that's a very important approach for the human experience.
And to clarify for our listeners, what Taylor means by throwing music theory back at it is that throughout music school, and even if you don't go to music school and you sort of educate yourself, you learn a lot about the relationship between different notes and different chords and how different elements of the music are created. And through that knowledge, you're able to then listen to pretty much any song in any genre, not from all around the world, but from a lot of different musical cultures. And then you're able to put those into quantifiable terms in order to understand them. So what Taylor was describing is the experience of not actually being able to enjoy the music because he's sitting there basically performing a mental analysis on what's going on in the music instead of feeling the music and enjoying the moment.
Yes, exactly. And that little pang of analysis will never go away. That's just ingrained in who I am. But realizing, like, stop that. Just take a break. You can enjoy this. You can just go.
Mm.
I'll go watch a movie, and well, I hope I go back to be able to watch a movie in a theater soon. But you'll go to that experience, and you can just experience the package. Like, I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh wow, I really liked how that drone of the sea right now, that low bass C is really what's driving. No, I can step away a little bit and experience the package. I know what makes the music tick, but it's no longer this blinding realism of this ingrained educational experience.
Absolutely. Have you ever experienced performance anxiety? And if so, how does it manifest?
Ooh, yeah, that's absolutely. I don't know. I find it hard to believe that people don't have performance anxiety to some
Mm.
degree. Like it's not a fact of it's not a fact that you're I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I have found that I have been able to harness that energy for productive means. And
Mm.
I think you'll find that it it's very difficult to explain, but I think other professionals will be able to say very similar things. Where yeah, we're all going to get nervous. Like it is a nerve-wracking thing to know that I have to play one cymbal note 40 minutes from now. That's the only note I have during this concert. I can't mess that up. Like there's no way to negate those anxieties. But I had my high school band director once told me, and I'll never forget it. He said, being nervous is a waste of time. Because, when you really rip that package apart, you're nervous because you're unprepared more often than not. So if you've given everything you've got to your preparation, the nervousness now is not from what you haven't done. Your nervousness is now simply because you're in a public performance and doing other things. So I like to harness that energy and really feed off it. And it invigorates me in a way where I can reflect that energy into my performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
I
the way
think I think you hit it right on the head when you said harness that nervous energy because I think that's what it's all about. It's like take that adrenaline, take that heightened sense of awareness and put it to work for you.
yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of friends of mine who take beta blockers for auditions and do a lot of
Really?
that stuff where they try to manage that.
Hmm.
They try to manage those feelings, but I can't do it. I've never tried it, so I can't speak for it. But I don't know. I found through performance practice, which is all it is performing over and over and over again and getting more and more comfortable. I've just found a way to take that nervous energy and wrap it up in the total package. Because as soon as I don't know, it really comes down to performance practice and doing it a lot. Because once you play those final notes of the concert and the audience erupts, you remember why they're here. They're not here to hear you mess it up. They're here to hear something great. They're not rooting against you. I know it seems like a lot of things in society are
Well,
rooting against a lot.
American audiences generally not rooting against you. I think it's important to understand that culturally, when you go
True.
around the world, the
Does
performance
change.
experience can be a little different. But yeah,
But I think as a larger package and as a larger message, the point of, as I said before, is to have an experience. That they're not most people aren't gunning for you to fail.
Mm.
So I think embracing that collective experience, embracing those nervous energies, and using it for good, using it for performance, I think is it's hard to learn and it's hard to explain, but I think it's common. I don't want to say common practice, but it is a theme that I hear from other musicians regularly.
Excellent. Taylor, those are all my questions. Do you have anything you'd like to add on anything we talked about or anything we didn't talk about?
I don't think so. I think I talked way too much as it is. But it was great. No, it's great. I don't get these kind of musical deep dive conversations often because it's just, you get so wrapped up in work all the time. And it's nice to just step back and chat about it.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Taylor Goodson.